Oh, we're going to be live just after some seconds. So we're live on Facebook.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Hello, everyone. This is Mohammed. And today we are going to talk about DevOps culture and its importance for businesses. We have two exceptional guests, our panelists. We have Michael from Red Hat. He has been helping companies to adopt DevOps. Also, he's very active over CNCF communities and he's also vivid open source supporter and contributor. We also have Vusal from Pasha Bank, and he is the head of engineering there. And he has been leading so many years engineering teams in banking and telecommunication industries. So without any further ado, let's meet with our guests. Michael, let's start with you. We are glad that we have you here. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Yes, thank you for having me. I would say good morning, as is good morning for me here in the United States, but I'll say good afternoon to everyone in Baku. So I'm Michael Ducy. I helped organize DevOpsDays Minneapolis. I also now help organize DevOpsDays Columbus. So I've been in the DevOps community or DevOpsDays community for around 7 years at this point, and have participated in a number of the different DevOps days throughout the world. And then also, as Mohammed said, I've done a lot in the CNCF around security and open source projects inside of the CNCF. But one thing that I've focused a lot on is DevOps. So I worked at Chef for a number of years, and through that, working with infrastructure as code and working with how there's that relationship between the tools and the technology and what you do at a cultural level, and helping organizations really understand what that cultural change is that they need to be undergoing. I've done a lot of work with large multinational companies such as Verizon, Nike, Starbucks, Nordstrom, and other companies like that as well here in the United States throughout my career. So.
It's awesome. Let's move to Vusal. Vusal, you can also introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much. My name is Vusal. You already mentioned it. I'm head of engineering at Pasha Bank, and I think many of Azerbaijani engineers knows that Pasha Bank moves a transformation project towards being a digital bank from traditional bank, and I'm leading this part from engineering point of view, and we go through all these obstacles of introducing DevOps culture and tools and agile methodology in traditional bank. So this is basically experience I'd like to share today.
All right. Okay. So, okay, guys, we have prepared some questions. These are very high-level questions. We will just get your opinions. I will start asking these questions to one of you, but I will get both of your opinion on the same question. And to start with, so I've been in following the DevOps era for the last 5 years, and every time I read a blog or I watch a conference, everybody describes DevOps slightly differently. So I would like to first learn how do you define DevOps and how do you position it? Let's start with Michael again, and let's get your opinion on that.
Yeah, you know, I fall back to Adam Jacob, this former CTO and the founder of Chef's definition of DevOps. And his definition is that DevOps is a cultural and professional movement based upon the experiences of its practitioners to build high velocity organizations. And I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up, in that, you know, we're taking what we learn, we're feeding what we learn back into the work that we do. It's a cultural movement, and it's also a professional movement, meaning that the professional movement means it influences the way that we work on a day-to-day basis and the processes and the tooling that we use. And I think it's just a good way to sum it up, that we don't get into this debate of like, is it a team? Is it an engineering position? Is it a title? And all of those sorts of things. So that's the definition that I lean on.
Sounds great. Vusal, what do you think about it?
Actually, it's very hard to add something to Michael's definition. It's he covered everything. So I agree with everything it mentioned. And what can I add? That people from engineering always start with combining three things: development, operations, and somewhere in between QA. So DevOps like something that builds it together. And always we think about hear about automation. But in general, it's as Michael described, it's culture which moves this all forward.
Okay, sounds great. Then let's continue with you, Vusal. And one of the things I also always hear, the differences or similarities between Agile and DevOps. What can you tell us about it? Are they same thing, or what's the difference?
Agile is methodology which describes, let's say, the software development lifecycle. It starts from this. Nowadays, it's a little bit changed. It's like cultural movement again, which transforms and moves not only in software development, but we can see implementations of Agile in different areas. But if we talk about similarities, I think the most important thing which connects DevOps culture and Agile culture is value. The both approaches are value-based. So in DevOps culture, if you say we implement DevOps or we say we implement Agile, we should start from question why we do this and what is the value. So this is basically what intersects between DevOps and Agile. I don't think that DevOps culture is possible without implementing proper Agile methodology, because the both of these ideas tells about the cross-functional approach. When we say about DevOps, we mean that developers and operations, they start to interact together, they start to work closer. So the same approach we see in Agile when business and IT start to operate closer. So this basically moves hand by hand. So
yeah, that's great answer. But yeah, let's hear Michael's opinion as well on
Yeah,
the same.
to kind of add on to that. So what you have to realize when you're trying to deploy code is that you have various steps, right? And so you might take the features or the specification from the product team, that moves into development, and then that moves into operations to actually get out. And then it goes to the customer where the customer actually uses it. And then you get a feedback loop that comes back into product, right? And so what Agile is about is really kind of a local optimization to that development section. And it doesn't necessarily focus on, it focuses a little bit on product and how you get features into the product pipeline and into development. And then it focuses very, very little on operations. So if you go back to the original idea of what the idea behind DevOps and what it was originally called, which was Agile operations, was this whole idea of like, how can we bring Agile principles to our operations work and to our release work so that we can not have the local optimization that was done in the development world also move over into the operations world. And so, how are they different? Well, Agile focuses almost solely on development practices and and then what has happened, DevOps has started to leak those things out of Agile and bring them into more parts of the organization so that you can begin to start working more like the developers do. And the nice thing about that is when you start working the same way and when you start using the same nomenclature, now you have this commonality that you can have between development and operations so that everyone understands what everyone is saying between each other. And then this culture can kind of spread across the entire organization.
Okay, sounds awesome. Again, now we get the basics explained for us. So let's move on other questions. I will continue with Vusal, and I want to ask some questions about challenges that's behind implementing DevOps, because I know that you are working in a bank, which is highly regulated and you know, very bureaucratic environments. Same for telecommunication companies. So I assume like the challenges are different between startups and like big organizations and enterprises to implement, to bring DevOps. What are the main challenges that you are trying to solve at Pasha Bank, and how do you approach those challenges?
Thank you for questions. Great one. And actually, many people think about implementing of tools. So although we implement a lot of like CI/CD tools, we move to the Amazon cloud. But the most important and the hardest weight was the changing of mindset. So when you always should ask, what is the value of what I'm doing? And so basically, I'm happy because in organization I work, the top management understands the real value of these things. But as far as we can observe in many organizations, any change you want to make in, let's say, IT and engineering side, it should be supported also by business side. So it should be supported by top management, because at the beginning it's investment, and this investment should be somehow proved that you really need it. And so we can divide the challenges into two areas. The first area is mindset and approach, and second is support. Only the tiny role of this in tools and technologies, because if you have passion to introduce something, and if you have passion to change something, the tools and techniques, it only requires time for you. So I think the main important thing that mindset and the business support.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think you are saying it's more like a cultural challenge than the technical challenge, right? Okay.
Because people, the most important thing, if before this transformation, all engineers, they have their own KPIs, which are basically their IT KPIs. And when you introduce DevOps approach and you introduce Agile approach, engineer is no longer responsible for writing the good code. He's responsible for business result. He's responsible for outcome, not output. So this is the main thing you should change. And if you change this, the rest will come. So if you understand this approach, you decide that, yes, I really need to be fast. I need to improve my time to market. So I need to automate, and that goes on.
Okay, okay. Michael, same question, but I think you are consulting different sized companies. So maybe you can focus on like, what are the different challenges that small companies faces to implement DevOps versus big enterprises, or, you know, bureaucratic environments, federal agencies, etc.
Yeah. So I work a lot with the U.S. federal agencies, and this is like you know, IRS, or our tax agency, our State Department, Postal Service, and things like that. One of the interesting things that I find is there's a lot of challenges in that government employees are kind of tend to be fairly set in their ways. So there's something called the fourth branch of the government. So in the US, we have the executive, which is like the president. We have the judicial, which are the courts. And then we have the legislative, which is the House and the Senate. And then the fourth branch is the federal employees that are the workers. And so the top three might do something and introduce some sort of legislation, but if the federal employees don't necessarily agree with it, then everything will just grind to a halt, because they won't actually implement those policies that the top three branches did. And very similar to DevOps, right? So like, if the bottom tier of employees don't necessarily agree with it, then they're not going to go and implement these ideas and these practices. And I think what's really important when you're going through any organization and trying to talk about these changes is you always have to put it into the context of what is in it for them, right? Like, what are they going to get out of it? And kind of set up that reward structure so that they understand, like, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make your job easier. We're trying to make your job more humane. We're trying to actually improve your work-life balance, which is very important for a lot of employees, and help them kind of understand that this is, yeah, we got to learn some new tooling. Yeah, we got to learn some new ways of working. Yeah, we have to crush the way all of our assumptions from before, but that's done with the goal of making our agency more efficient so that we can actually continue to operate, so that we don't get our money and our budget cut, so that you can have a better work-life balance and all of those sorts of things. So I think generally what you have to do is you have to, large or small company, you have to make them understand, or government agency, you have to make them understand what's in it for them, and personalize it for that individual to help bring that change along.
Okay, awesome answer. So let's continue with you. So I also hear, like, I'm thinking about DevOps, it's all about reducing communication overhead and empowering individual delivery teams, right? And so how do you design the powers of a single team? Like, where is their end-to-end responsibility starts and like, basically, how do you design and consult companies to achieve that?
Can you explain the question to me a little bit more? Can you expand on it?
Yeah. So, like, when we say like DevOps, implementing DevOps, we usually like hear that we are empowering the individual delivery teams a lot more, right? And how do you like arrange the power of these delivery teams, what they should do end to end? Like, should they be responsible on designing solutions plus implementing code plus delivery of your software? What should they own in terms of responsibility, like individual teams?
Gotcha. I understand now. So, so I'm a big fan, and a lot of the work that I do at Red Hat also emphasizes this idea of cross-functional teams. So, the delivery team and the product delivery team is what I'm talking about, should have everyone on that team from every cross-cutting area that you need to actually go and deliver the software. So if that's an SRE assigned to it, and of course this person may not be permanently assigned or 100% assigned to the particular product delivery team, but they do need to be there and available. Your development teams, your product teams, any operations or release people as well should be a part of that team. And so if you have that cross-functional team, then the question of how much of part of the delivery should they be responsible for? Well, that's easy, all of it, because you have everybody on that team who has a responsibility for that product actually getting out there. And that's why you do cross-functional teams, so that you can have these individual teams empowered. Now, going back to that a little bit, you know, then some organizations, they're very, and especially in government agencies, of course, that I work with, they're very hesitant to do that. And give power to this one individual team. So then what you end up doing is you end up looking to see what power can you give to the tooling. And so how much can I put in my CI/CD pipeline to make sure that I have all of the gates that are needed to make sure that security is taken care of, to make sure that code quality is where we want it to be, to make sure that testing has been done and that whatever we're going to roll out isn't going to completely break whatever we're shipping for the end user and things like that. And so while you give that empowerment and trust, you always go and back it up and check on it by using automation and using tooling and having those feedback loops in your deployment process.
Okay, great. That answers my question. But let's hear the similar opinions from Vusal. How do you approach end-to-end responsibilities? How do you empower your teams at Pasha Bank?
I think you mentioned in a question you had before about difference between startup and organization. This is the main challenge actually of big organizations, is their speed. So by implementing Agile, each big organization tries to mimic the startup behavior. So startup has a high speed, And actually, the kind of things like Agile and DevOps, they are very obvious for startup because they don't have a silo mentality. So people are on the same place, they do the same work for the same objective. And empowering of teams actually had the same idea, is to build a team which will work like a startup. And in our teams, we have product owner, designer, and backend and front-end engineers who have the common objective, and they have full responsibility and end-to-end ownership of the product. At the beginning, it was a little bit hard because especially in bank, we have core banking system, which requires a separate set of knowledge. And in telecommunications, like you have a billing system which requires a specific knowledge. But time going, we start to, as Michael mentioned, attach to the team all knowledge that is required. So you have dedicated resources in team. It's like engineers, product owner, and designers. And you may have shared resources like voodoos, for example. You may have several resources which we, let's say, work with several teams. But the main idea of end-to-end ownership is that the squad or team should not depend on someone else in order to make some decision and move forward. So you should give some empowerment and flexibility.
Yeah, that's a good point. To kind of expand on that, I kind of, if you look at the cloud provider model and how you have all of these services, you usually have the same sort of thing in an enterprise or an organization. And then what AWS does is they have solution architects who go and advise and help you implement the AWS services and help draw out an architecture for you. And then that solution architect obviously isn't going to stay with that customer forever. He has, or she has many customers. And you have to build that same sort of model in your organization as well, where you have this kind of trusted advisor who can actually jump between the different delivery teams to give that advice that they need to actually implement whatever they're trying to implement or deploy what they're trying to deploy.
Okay, great. And Michael, you mentioned like in just now cloud solutions, and you also mentioned previously that automation and CI/CD tooling will solve some of the permission issues. We will delegate these issues to tooling. So my question is, who is going to handle this tooling itself? Will there be a platform engineering team, or is it the delivery team itself that implements this tooling? And if it's different team, we are creating a silo again, right? So how do you approach this?
So yeah, so that's an interesting point, and I see this a lot in the different agencies that I work with. So normally what we're seeing is that there's a platform team, and that platform team is responsible for running, your CI/CD pipeline and tooling, and then underneath that, usually a container platform like Kubernetes or hopefully OpenShift or whatever way that you actually deploy your software. I had to get the OpenShift plug in there. Sorry. This platform team, the way this platform team has to begin to think of themselves is really in this way of providing a service. So they really need to think of themselves as being a cloud provider and understanding that their primary mechanism, that their primary interface into the tooling is an API. And then they have to really start to think about in terms of this API, whether if they're starting to meet the SLOs and starting to put service level objectives in place to make sure that this service is actually offering what they expect. And then also having things around what we call net promoter scores. So the net promoter score, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially just where they ask you a question, would you recommend the solution to your friends, right? Or would you recommend the solution to your other developers, right? And if you start to think of yourself more as like a cloud provider, even though you're internal, or start to have these behaviors like a cloud provider, you really start to understand how you're offering a business service. And it'll kind of change the mindset of how you kind of operate that platform and fall out of this mode of just creating yet another silo but you're creating a service that has objectives behind it that people can consume. Because at the end of the day, what's important is consumption of the platform, and you have to try and drive as much consumption of that platform as possible. So you need to treat yourself just as like another business. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you have these kind of platform architects that then go and help the delivery teams understand what are the capabilities of the platform, how to consume those capabilities of the platform, and kind of advise them on the way forward of consuming and using the platform. So you really have to think of yourself as yet another business inside of the larger business.
Okay, that's actually very clear to me. Vusal, what do you think? What do you have at Pasha Bank? Do you have a platform team that provides the platform to delivery teams, or how does it work there?
Actually, it's one of the hardest questions, how to deal with platform teams, because we returned back to this question several times. When we start with 3 or 4 squads, we don't have such problem at all. And when we move closer to 15, 12 and 15 squads, it's this problem becomes very important. And during the last year, we have DevOpsDays Baku conference. We have a lot of interesting guests. Actually, I will be happy to see you this year. And this was one of the questions we ask a lot from all our guests. And what is our, let's say, output from all these discussions? Currently, we don't have platform team as it explains in literature. It highly depends on scale of your organization. And I think if you have till 10 squads, till 10 teams, you don't need separate platform team. Because separate platform teams creates, as was mentioned, silo mentality. It creates dependency of delivery teams, and it's what we decided right now. We decided to have digital platform squad with product owner, which is, as Michael mentioned, they have their own KPIs of building the APIs for external customers, but let's say microservices which are common, we cannot say that this belongs to WAR on another product squad. We spread them across teams. So we have owners of each microservice, we have owners of each service, but your product squad may own the service which is not serve only your squad, it may serve another squads too. So currently we don't have, let's say, a platform team, but I think we will return back to this question when a number of our squads will reach 20, 25, and maybe we will return to this question.
Yeah, okay, sounds great. Yeah, so you also mentioned, Vusal, microservices. So this is obviously a architectural design decision, but how does it work with DevOps culture? Does it help to have microservices as an architectural design choice to achieve DevOps, or it doesn't matter at all? How do you think about it?
I think it's not like the critical that you may have DevOps culture only if you have microservices, but if you have microservice architecture, it helps a lot more because it's reduce your dependency. Mm-hmm. And microservices itself has a lot of, let's say, advantage, but as in all solution-based decisions, it's not like a pill that if you will have microservices, everything will be fine. So this is a kind of decision you should make based on your business objectives. So if you have high scale, if you have plans to scale, it's better to choose microservice architecture. But it's not, let's say, in all cases good. But definitely it helps because it's when we talk about automation part of DevOps, it's easier to test microservices, it's easier to build and deliver microservices. So it has a lot of advantages to introduce DevOps, and vice versa is very important. You may not have a good microservices architecture without DevOps. So it's impossible to manually deploy all the services and stuff like that.
Yeah. Sounds great. And Michael, what do you think about how architecture helps to achieve DevOps in general?
Yeah, you know, it goes back to this idea of kind of socio-technological systems is what they're called. And so this, you know, these architecture pattern changes came along right around the same time as the process and the culture changes were taking place with DevOps, right? And we could ask ourselves, you know, did cloud and infrastructure as code and microservices and containers all develop at the same time as DevOps and these process changes in Agile and Scrum? Or were they codependent upon one another, right? So like, did DevOps arise from the need to be able to automate all of these servers that were being thrown at us because we can now spin up an instance in the cloud in 6 seconds, right? So these things kind of co-evolved with one another. So it's very interesting to see how complementary they are to one another. And to Vusal's point, like the fact that you can put an application in a container and you can build it very quickly and then you can get it out and you can ship it and then you can then have it spun up fits very, very nicely the goals of what you're trying to do with DevOps and how you're trying to deploy an application fast and get code out there faster. And then now you have these things called service meshes where you can start to do A/B testing very quickly. You can leak a little bit of your traffic onto one instance and see if the code changes you made are actually going to work and things like that, right? And so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that these things kind of co-develop along at the same pace with one another and along with one another. And they are definitely enablers of one another in that DevOps finds new ways to use this new technology as it evolves. It changes the practice of how we do DevOps. And then we have different conversations about how you effectively you know, deploy your applications and how you effectively do release engineering and all of those things. And then technology evolves again, and then we go back and we have different conversations about how we do the process and the culture and the things like that. So I would say they're extremely complementary to one another, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily, you know, you have to be doing microservices to do DevOps, right? You can still do DevOps on VMs, you can still have your monolithic application. And I think the important distinction to make is that it's a system. And so you have to understand like all of your IT infrastructure is a system, and you have to understand where you can optimize in that system. And if you know, rewriting a monolithic application into microservices isn't going to be the most efficient use of your time, then you should probably just leave that monolith and deal with that monolith as you need to deal with it, and rewrite or re-implement things, or as you write new code, use a microservices or serverless framework or whatever you might want us to use. As always, it depends.
Yeah, that's great answer actually. Yeah, I have a question from one of the viewers, Alexi. He's asking how to evaluate the efficiency of DevOps work and bring transparency to management on like the efficiency of DevOps work. Like how can we you know, see the KPIs and stuff? Yeah, Michael, let's start with you, then switch to Vusal.
Yeah. So this is interesting because we had an internal call last week at Red Hat, and it was a call that we called Transformation Office Hours. And so we had a bunch of people from the Global Transformation Office, and 2 of them were Andrew Clay Schaefer, who we all know through DevOpsDays, and then another gentleman by the name of Jade Bloom. And well, I won't get into metrics, but what I will say, one of the things that came out of the conversation is that it's very important to understand where you're measuring and why you're measuring what you're measuring. So if you have all of these subsystems of this larger system, right? And from a business perspective or from the CIO's perspective, the CIO only sees the forest, like they see this larger system. And so the CIO is going to have these metrics that are for this larger system, and that might be cost per transaction. How much are we shifting onto our digital platform versus doing things like manually on paper? And then when you drill down into the subsystems, those subsystems might be development, operations, release engineering, product management, all of those sorts of things. you have to measure each individual subsystem for the merits of that individual subsystem, right? So while everyone has the same goal of like getting the cost per transaction down, the way development does that is going to be different. And so the way development needs to measure what they're actually pushing through of like code quality metrics and how much they're shipping and things like that is going to be different than what operations is measuring, because operations is going to be measuring things that more focus on resiliency and reliability of the platform. And then all of these things should bubble up to that kind of overall CIO view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense.
So so one thing about systems is it's always important to make sure that you measure at the right point and understand why you're measuring, because you could optimize one area of the subsystem and then you've just moved the bottleneck to other parts of the system. So I'll finish with that and let Vishal add on.
Yeah. Great mentioned. What can I add to Michael's view is that in general, in order to let's say demonstrate the efficiency of what you are doing, there are two things. So first is like business metrics. It's the things you can change into let's say money-based explanation. And second is what we call NFR, so non-functional requirements. So we may have requirements like from performance, availability, manageability, and stuff like that. And when we talk about implementation of DevOps, the first two important things from NFR side is the scalability. So we start from scalability by introducing infrastructure as a code, by introducing DevOps tools and techniques. And by this culture, you're able to achieve scalability, first of all. If we move closer to the business side things, it's of course time to market. So if you work in an organization where you have release management, when you release once in several weeks or several months, of course, the introducing of release when you finish your job, it's something sounds like something cosmic. So the time to market is very important. And the next in this view is performance, scalability, and as I mentioned. Another point which if you want to calculate and describe this, it's a cost. So if cost of manual work, so how much time people spend on manual work. For example, if I deploy something manually, so how much time I spent, and you can transform it to the monetary explanation using the wage of full-time employee. And you can measure this in money-based, so how you reduce by automation things. And another part of DevOps, which is very important for business, extremely if you describe it to C-level, is value of feedback. So by implementing DevOps techniques, as Michael mentioned, when you introduce A/B testing, like canary deployment and stuff like that, you get feedback from customer faster, and it makes your business decisions faster and better.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay. Actually, I have a follow-up question for you, Vusal, about that. Like you mentioned time to markets, and you work at Pasha Bank. Let's say I joined you as an intern, and I built a small POC product, like a link shortener, but I need a domain. How much time do I'm going to spend to get an approval to get that domain, subdomain, let's say from Pasha Bank, because it's probably looked by legal teams, branding teams, and there's a lot of teams that affects our delivery that's outside of the technical teams. How do you see these kind of challenges?
In general, for any product, we have an internal, let's say, governance. From idea to MVP, it shouldn't take more than 3 months. But when we take idea, we mean that there is a discovery period. Then people should create a business case for this. And they should somehow defend this business case. So this business case, there are many deliverables besides business case, but the main idea is to describe the value for organization and for customer. So if you can describe it, if you can count it, so you receive a team in order to start development. So if we move to your question, if you join as intent from idea stage to MVP, the most time it will take 3 months. But in general, if you already receive a, let's say, positive response to your business case, you don't have any request-based approval, because you have squad and you have voodoo. So you have team with your engineers and product owner. You know how your link shortener looks like, how it should work. And the only thing you should do is to manage your alignment meetings with InfoSecurity, with legal, so just take their approval. So if everything's approved, it will not take more than a couple of days, depending on development speed.
Yeah. You want to add anything to Michael, to that question? What should be the idea?
No, I just say that's a good point in that there's often parts of the organization that you have to interface with that are beyond IT that have different timelines, and you always have to kind of take those into account. We tend to forget and think that IT is the center of the world for everything, but that's not always the case.
Okay, awesome. So I have another question from viewers. Ruslan asked, this is about upgrading the software. So let's say this is about delivery, actually, new versions of software. What's the ideal way to deploy your software? He is asking is MVP enough, or just should we wait till the end of the implementation to the scope implementation? So how should we approach to this? Your advices, please.
Well, I'm of the mindset that you should attempt to upgrade as quickly as possible and as often as possible. And I assume you mean upgrading by upgrading things like your dependencies and other libraries like that. The problem is that if you don't have this kind of frequent update cycle, what you're going to find yourself doing is drifting farther and further away from those updates and those changes. And so then when you're going to go and finally upgrade to the latest version of a dependency or something like that, you now have, 20 release notes and change logs that you have to go through instead of maybe just 2. And that's going to create the amount of work that you have to do to actually understand whether if you can bring this new dependency in, whether if it's an ongoing thing that you're constantly doing, and you constantly have a process around bringing these new dependencies in and upgrading these dependencies, you're going to be able to pay down that technical debt a lot quicker, because the technical debt is going to be a lot smaller. So I would say, don't wait. Try and have as much automation around bringing in these new dependencies into your environment as quickly as possible, so that you can vet them and get the kinks worked out of them as quickly as possible, is my advice.
So faster feedback loop, basically the answer.
Faster feedback loop, which then also means it's going to be a smaller amount of work rather than if you waited for 20 releases before you upgraded.
Yeah, great answer. Vusal, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I would like to add 2 points. First point is I completely agree that you should deliver as faster as you can. And we can divide this situation into 2 parts. So if you create a prototype, of course, you should deliver a prototype as fast as you can in order to get feedback from customers, in order to decide for yourself if you continue this product development or not. But if you talk about product that you already have in the market, so you support it and you improve it, I suggest to spend the time to build the right infrastructure and right automation in order to achieve instant deployment. Because we observe the situation when we start this automation at Pasha Bank, we see statistics that all deployments to the production, they appear at the end of the sprint, at the end 2 days. And we start to analyze why it happens, and we come up with the idea that if you're not sure about your upgrade, subconsciously you want to make it later. But how you can assure yourself that you want to move the production faster? First, it's deployment techniques. So the fail fast approach. So you may fail faster, but you shouldn't fail for your customers. You may fail for 10 customers, realize and improve it. And the same is about testing. So you may improve the quality of your automated tests in order to move to production faster and feel yourself more confident. So if we talk about production services, try to build the system when you can merge your pull request and immediately get result.
That's great answer again. Yeah, I have one final question. This is more about related to the current situation the world is in. So your DevOps practices, how does it affect remote working actually? Because I heard that, I think yesterday Twitter announced that they will be permanently working remotely. So does it support working remotely, like independence of the teams, or like does it help, or is it not related in any way? Michael, let's start with you.
Well, I'll just take our situation at Red Hat. We've been work from home for a while, I think since around March 16th. And then we've been told that we're not going back to the office until at least June 15th. I totally expect that to get pushed forward. I think what's really interesting about at least Red Hat's case is because we have this strong culture of open source, and we've had this culture of like, we work remote very heavy, or a large part of our organization works remote very heavily with people that they never see on a day-to-day basis, or that they probably never even met in person. We kind of have this strong work remote culture kind of embedded in the organization. So as we've had to have our teams leave the offices and go into their homes, we've kind of already had this culture in place that people have been able to plug very easily into. I would say for some of our customers and our partners, we do see that it's much harder. What I do think is we're going to see is that we're going to see a lot more organizations realize that they can do work from home, and that they can collaborate remotely over the phone. And I think what they're also going to, or over video like this, what we're also going to see is we're going to see a little bit of a change in mindset, in that more people are going to want to work from home, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but maybe a few days a week. And then employers are going to be much more comfortable with the concept of being able to enable employees to do that, because we kind of have this track record of people being successful with it.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Vusal, again, you are working for a bank, and it's probably different case for you, but
yeah.
We don't have experience to work in this scale remotely before, and this was completely something new for us. So what we have learned from this is that the problematic period was only 1 week, and the teams actually started to self-organize. One team started to use Hangouts, another one Zoom, search Microsoft Teams. And during 1 week, we started to somehow create the internal guidelines. We find out the guidelines of different companies and adapt them. And actually the velocity of teams didn't change. Only 1 week we have some change, but then it turns back. If we talk about how DevOps culture helps, I think two things should be mentioned here. First is automation help us not to feel any problem. It's absolutely comfortable to work from home, to make code review, push request, pull, and everything works fine. And the second is culture. When you have the common objective, as I mentioned before, people start to organize themselves. They don't wait for us tell somehow you should behave at home. They just start work at home. And actually, I think any management in all organizations, they have some fear that if you will move people to remote work, the velocity will calm down. So now we have as evidence that actually remote work is not so bad. It's actually better.
Awesome. Okay, I ran out of my questions. We are over 50 minutes anyway. I will get your closing thoughts. You can keep as long as you want. If you want to add anything that you think it's useful for our audience, please go ahead. Let's start with Michael again.
Well, one thing that I think the current situation is going to bring to us is it's going to bring this kind of rapid acceleration of things moving digital as quickly as possible. So I would definitely encourage everyone to kind of keep that in mind. We're going to find new ways to use technology to, bring us all together. But also what it's going to do is it's going to kind of, everybody's going to have to find a way to provide services online. And I think a good example is in the United States, each state is responsible for its own unemployment system. Most of those unemployment systems have been written in COBOL and have persisted for a number of years. And then all of a sudden we have all these people that are unemployed and the COBOL can no longer handle the scale. And so like we have states that are looking for COBOL programmers. So if the borders were open, I would say if anybody knows COBOL in Azerbaijan, here's your chance to come to the US and learn COBOL or to work on COBOL. But like, this is a great example of like how the technical debt has laggard for so long. And now we're like forced to do something about it and forced into this digital transformation about how we can work in a more modern way and how we can serve the end users in a more modern way. And we're going to see more and more examples of this come out of it. And I also think we're going to see some really good stories around how we've used technology to kind of overcome and to grow stronger as a world and as different countries and communities and cultures.
That's great answer, actually. Thank you. Vusal, your closing thoughts?
What can I say? I think that this period and the thing that happens demonstrates that digital transformation is very important for all organizations, regardless of the industry they are working. And there are companies who started it before and they have some advantage. And I would like to just again to go through this importance of this digital transformation and call all companies and organizations to think about this. And if they are not started, this it's not late to start and provide the necessary resources to make digital transformation of their organizations. And all transformations, it's like improvement. So we can use this opportunity to improve ourselves, improve our organizations, improve our technology. So let's use the situation to be better.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Guys, I really enjoyed talking with you both. Thank you for your time and talking with our audience. Stay healthy, stay at home, and hope to talk to you soon again. We can close the call here at this time. You can just leave. I'm stopping the